thousands of years ago, there came a night that lasted a generation. Kings froze to death in their castles, same as the shepherds in their huts. And women smothered their babies rather than see them starve. In that darkness, the White Walkers came for the first time. They swept through cities and kingdoms, riding their dead horses, hunting with their packs of pale spiders, big as hounds.
Hello, sweet summer children. I'm back with some juice to get you through the long night. So everyone has been going nuts about the greenlit pilot for the prequel to Game of Thrones. And when I did my first reaction to the news, I skipped over some big things and you guys had a lot of questions. And one of the biggest questions or reasons why people were upset was because dragons. The first thing I want to clarify is just because HBO has ordered the pilot does not mean that HBO will order the series, and it also doesn't mean that HBO won't order another pilot for another series and pick the better of the two. So they have to like the pilot in order for a series to get ordered. There's a lot of factors to it, but it's actually good news. It's a step in the right direction. So George took to his Nada blog and he had some things to say. This one really puts the pre in prequel, since it's set not 90 years before Game of Thrones like Dunk and Egg or a few hundred years, but rather 10,000 years. Well, assuming the oral histories of the first men are accurate, but there are maesters at the Citadel who insist it has only been half that long. We're very early in the process, of course, with the pilot order just in, so we don't have a director yet, or a cast, or a location, or even a title. My vote would be The Long Night, which says it all, but I'd be surprised if that's where we end up. More likely, HBO will want to work the phrase Game of Thrones in there somewhere. We'll know sooner or later. Okay, so George would like to title the series The Long Night, and George specifically hints at the histories not being accurate. I've been saying this, I've done intricate videos on the timeline not being accurate, and we're going to get back to that in 1 minute. Before we move on, I want to read to you the description of the series that got greenlit for a pilot. I know you've probably heard it 100 times by now, but one more time of just reading this brief summary, because I'm going to be making a huge point, I don't think it's going to hurt. Taking place thousands of years before the events of Game of Thrones, the series chronicles the world's descent from the golden age of heroes into its darkest hour. And only one thing is for sure. From the horrifying secrets of Westeros history to the true origin of the White Walkers, the mysteries of the East to the Starks of legend, it's not the story we think we know. Okay. Of course it's not the story we think we know, because the timeline we think we know is all a lie. But if you've been watching my videos, then maybe it is the story that we think we know. I mean, maybe, it's possible. I doubt it. But anyway, so the first thing I want to address is dragons. We all love dragons, but people are just writing the dragons off like we won't have dragons. That sucks. Dragons. There were no dragons during the Age of Heroes. But I'm like, no. I'm willing to hold this L, but I'm like 99% sure that we will indeed have dragons. And let me tell you why. So the first reason is that dragons roamed Westeros way before Aegon the Conqueror came to Westeros with his sister and his dragons. Dragons were in Westeros before the rise of Illyria. Dragons were in Westeros before the Andals invaded Westeros. There is proof of this. And the breadcrumbs lead to trails of fused black stone. So there are two types of mysterious black stone in our story. One is oily black stone, but then there's another, fused black stone. So oily black stone is all of that stuff that you see in a shy. It's what the sea stone chair is made out of. But fused black stone, that's something else. Fused black stone almost 100% comes from dragons. So in Old Town we have what's called Battle Isle, and that's where the High Tower is. The High Tower's black foundation is a labyrinth of unadorned fused black stone. It's like a fortress. So there are also dragon roads from Old Valyria, abandoned roads that are made of this same fused black stone. Or you could look at the wall in Volantis that was made of the same fused black stone. All of this was made by dragons. I also believe that Dragonstone is also made of fused black stone. I don't think it ever actually definitively says Dragonstone is made of fused black stone in the books or anything like that, but it's hinted at. The dragons cannot come to life. They are carved of stone, child. In olden days, our island was the westernmost outpost of the great freehold of Valyria. It was the Valyrians who raised the citadel, and they had ways of shaping stone since lost to us. So the fused black stone is our first hint that dragons have been in Westeros before the Targaryens. But there is way more than just fused black stone. If you look to Winterfell, Winterfell is the only castle in Westeros other than Dragonstone to have gargoyles adorned on it. It's so out of place that gargoyles would be in Winterfell. Shireen was afraid of the gargoyles, and that's where we learned that the Valyrians had ways of shaping stones that were lost to men. These lost ways almost definitely had something to do with dragonfire, amongst other things. So let's go back to Winterfell. Winterfell was raised by Brandon the Builder during the Age of Heroes, but the oldest part of Winterfell is the crypts and the first keep. The first keep is crowned in gargoyles, so maybe the first keep that is credited to Bran the Builder was built with the assistance of dragons or dragon magic or Valyrian magic or dragon glass or something to do with dragons. There are no other castles in Westeros with gargoyles on it. None. Only Winterfell and Dragonstone, at least that we know of. We haven't seen every castle, but of the ones we have seen, Winterfell and Dragonstone are the only castles to have gargoyles, and this spawns a lot of the Dragons of Winterfell theories that I will indeed get into at a later date. But this is another huge hint that dragons were indeed in Westeros before men. Now, another tale from the Age of Heroes adds a whole new layer of bullshit onto the timeline. Let's talk about this. This is the legend of the last hero. In the north, they tell of a last hero who sought out the intercession of the children of the forest, his companions abandoning him or dying one by one as they faced ravenous giants, cold servants, and the others themselves. Alone, he finally reached the children despite the efforts of the White Walkers, and all the tales agree this was a turning point. Thanks to the children, the first men of the Night's Watch band together and were able to fight and win the battle for Dawn, the last battle that broke the endless winter and sent the others fleeing to the icy north. Okay, so there's a big red flag about the last hero, and it comes from Sam in A Feast for Crows. See if you catch it before I even say anything. I bet you're gonna catch it. The armor of the others is proof against most ordinary blades, if tales can be believed, said Sam. And their own swords are so cold that they shatter steel. Fire will dismay them, though, and they are vulnerable to obsidian. He remembered the one he had faced in the haunted forest, and how it had seemed to melt away when he stabbed it with the dragonglass dagger Jon had made for him. I found one account of the Long Night that spoke of the last hero slaying others with a blade of dragon steel. Supposedly they could not stand against it. Dragon steel, Jon frowned. Valyrian steel? So the last hero supposedly performed his acts during the Age of Heroes, during the Long Night. But if dragon steel is Valyrian steel, then how can we think there weren't dragons in Westeros during this era? If dragons didn't even exist at this time, because according to the timeline, Valyria doesn't even exist yet. But if that's the case, how would one even know what a dragon is and be able to write it down in books and talk about it in legend? How would they know what a dragon is to name something after it? But what makes this passage by Sam so eye-opening is immediately before Sam says all that he says about the last hero's blade and it being dragon steel, he says all of the histories about the Dawn Age are wrong. The oldest histories we have were written after the Andals came to Westeros. The first men only left us runes on rocks, so everything we think we know about the Age of Heroes and the Dawn Age and the Long Night comes from accounts set down by Septons thousands of years later. There are archmaesters at the Citadel who question all of it. Those old histories are full of kings who reigned for hundreds of years and knights riding around 1,000 years before there were knights. You know the tales: Brandon the Builder, Simon Star Eyes, Night's King. We say that you are the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but the oldest list I've found shows 674 commanders. So Dragonsteel, or Valyrian Steel, seems to be like a White Walker killer in the TV show. But in the books, this isn't canon as far as we know. So as far as we know, Valyrian Steel was made in Valyria, and the Long Night occurred before the rise of Valyria, and the ways of making Valyrian Steel were lost in the Doom. So again, the timeline does not add up. So we have multiple tales of dragons: dragons from the moon, dragons from Ashai, dragons being sprung forth from the 14 flames. But dragon bones can be found in Ib and the jungles of Sothoros. The world of Ice and Fire also points to legends of ice dragons roaming the shivering sea, spreading their vast translucent wings. So there's definitely some evidence of dragons being around pre-Targaryen. So I definitely think we are very, very likely going to have dragons in a prequel that's set in the Age of Heroes. I don't think that you can tell the story of the Long Night or the Age of Heroes without dragons. Try to remember the story that we know, or the story that we're actually being told, doesn't mention dragons in the timeline until after the Long Night. But it's not the story that we think we know. Also, it talks about legends of the East in the prequel description, so let me address that real quick. I think the new show could be very similar to Game of Thrones. Like, we may be following the Starks in Westeros, but across the Narrow Sea, we could be seeing what's going on over there, maybe even some great Empire of the Dawn stuff, which would mean dragons and gemstone emperors. And I say this because George said he thinks the series should be titled The Long Night. Well, allegedly, according to the Bones and Beyond in the world of Ice and Fire, the Long Night was brought on by something that was happening in the East. In the annals of the further east, it was the blood betrayal, as the Bloodstone Emperor's usurpation of the Amethyst Empress is named, that ushered in the age of darkness called the Long Night. Despairing of the evil that had been unleashed on the earth, the maiden Maid of Light turned her back upon the world, and the Lion of Night came forth in all his wrath to punish the wickedness of men. So I think you cannot tell the story of the Long Night and the Age of Heroes and all of that without dragons. So all of you that were craving dragons and Valyrian type of stuff and all of that, I don't think you have anything to worry about. I think you're going to get a lot of that. I think while we see things going on in Westeros, on the continent Westeros, we are also going to be on the continent Essos, seeing the Great Empire stuff. The Valyrians pre-Valyria. But what do you think? What do you think the odds of us getting dragons are? And do you believe that dragons were around during the Age of Heroes? As always, thanks for watching. Thanks to everyone that supports me on Patreon. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and join the sweet summer family. Okay, my sweet summer children, have a good day.
Shame.